is the current president of NPSNJ. His energy and passion for native plants is absolutely contagious to anyone who has ever met Kazys. Coming from a background of art, architecture, and history, he brings a unique appreciation of native plants and a discerning eye to garden design with natives. This past summer, he was very gracious. I called him up. I was about 15 minutes from his house and said, "Oh, I've never seen your garden. Can I stop by?" And he said, "Of course." And I stopped by and I had a wonderful, I told him I only had 5 minutes. So he gave me about an hour and a half tour of his garden. It was fabulous. It was beautiful. It was diverse. And it was simply delightful. Tonight, he's going to be talking about that special space, the forest edge that describes so many of the areas where we live, both large and small, and how native plants can so beautifully and effectively be used in that space. I very much look forward to hearing and seeing what he has in store for us this evening. I know he's going to give us a rather longer introduction to how he got to this space and how he came from art and architecture and history and dove into the land of native plant landscaping. So with all that said, I'm going to stop because you all signed up this evening to listen to Kazys speak, not me. Kazys, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Randy. And let's see, can we see my slide share yet? Oh, I need to actually hit share, don't I? How about that? Does that work? Okay. Hopefully, yes, because I can't see you. Good. I see a thumbs up from Randy. Excellent. Hi. So I'm Kazys Varnelis. I'm the NPSNJ president. And thank you very much, Randy. Randy's been a big influence on me and was absolutely stellar president. I've been delighted and most honored to follow in her footsteps this year. Although I certainly can't do anything like what she can do. In fact, this is, speaking of things, Randy's given many, many lectures on native plants, and this is my very first one. I've lectured throughout the world on architecture and architecture history and art, technology, but never about plants. And so this is a new thing for me. So let's start. This talk is it's going to begin with something that we don't really address enough in the native plant movement. And that's the question of aesthetics and design. And this talk is also about my work on one very difficult site. It's work that's still in progress. I'm not satisfied with it yet. I think one day I probably will. I'm getting to the point where the front of the house is getting there. The rear I was happy with a couple of years ago, and now I am completely rethinking. But as with all garden design projects, I think these things do require time, and I'm okay with that. So let's start by talking about the native plant movement. Many of us are involved in native plant gardening because of environmental benefits. We talk about things like ecosystem services, about the benefits of native plants to pollinators. And this ethical dimension, based on science, is unquestionably critical. It's very important. It's a reason that many of us are involved in native plants. At the same time, if we want to increase the rate of adoption of native plants, if we want to convince people who are skeptical of their virtues even after we've said all of that, we need to do more. And I think that is a place where we can turn to design. And that's somewhere that I come from. I come from the world of design. We need to win over eyes as well as hearts. We talk about cues to care, but even that bothers me, as it implies that native plant gardens might be inherently unappealing without special effort. This framing can be problematic. Again, this talk is going to be personal in that I'm not a garden designer who has experience with any other sites, only on this one. So I can only share what I know about my site, and mine, like all sites, is peculiar in its own ways. So I'm going to go on, beginning with a little bit of a talk about beauty, a little bit of an introduction to myself that I probably wouldn't always give, but given that this is my first talk to NPSNJ, I felt like I should. And then with that out of the way, I want to turn to woodland gardening and with it, native gardening as a whole. And along the way, I'll be introducing some if they're more advanced design principles, but let's just say design principles, take them or leave them. I think they have some utility. And I also want to point out that our YouTube channel has a host of talks that you can get going with. Just go to YouTube, type in NPSNJ, and you will see a vast number of videos. You can also see them on our website. There are amazing resources in our that all of the people who I've worked with have developed, and there really are a lot of things to offer. And I'm going to try not replicating everything they've said, but trying to maybe offer something a little bit different. All right, so let's talk about beauty. Beauty is, again, I said there's a problem that the native plant movement has with beauty. Now, beauty, in that we don't talk about it enough. We talk a lot, again, about ethics, but what about beauty? Beauty is to a degree subjective and controversial. Here's a Jackson Pollock. I like Jackson Pollock. Probably since high school, I've enjoyed seeing Jackson Pollock's paintings. I find their three-dimensionality, which is utterly invisible in this slide, but is very visible if you go to, say, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Incredible. I find his paintings beautiful. Many people don't. That's okay. But there are things many of us can agree with that are beautiful. This is Seihoji Temple in Kyoto, also known as Kokudera, the Moss Temple. It costs roughly $25 to enter. You have to reserve well in advance on the internet. And to be allowed in, you have to copy a sutra with 49 kanji, or Japanese characters, in silence. You get to use a marker. You don't have to use the brush that the Japanese use. You can also recite the sutra from memory, but you have to do that in Japanese. So good luck, unless you know Japanese very well. And it was, we did it. A whole bunch of people did it with us. And we walked through it, and we thought this place was beautiful. I think it's safe to say that everybody who was there seemed like they were quite excited about this experience. Nobody seemed to take a quick look and then rush off. Even our 18-year-old who we brought to the site agreed that this was a place of beauty. Again, we can't always agree on everything being beautiful, but there are places that have a degree of attention to them, a degree of design to them that people do accept. And I think that that's something we need to do with the native plant movement, is shift our window, let's say this thing called the Overton window, to shift the window of public opinion to thinking about native plants as something that is actually the most beautiful form of gardening. And I think we can think of that. And why do we want to do that besides this question of making it more acceptable? Well, I remember I was a college professor for many years, so here I am citing a text. This is a wonderful book called On Beauty and Being Just by Elaine Scarry, who's a philosopher. And she writes that beauty brings copies of itself into being. It makes us draw it, takes photographs of it, or describe it to other people. So that's kind of my goal in my garden. It's not just to make a beautiful garden for myself, but maybe I can inspire people to make other beautiful gardens, very different ones than mine. That's actually in many ways how I got into it. Various degrees of, say, inspiration going, I can do that, or I want to remember that, or I want to bring something into being that will embody what I think is beautiful in nature. I think of I didn't know Doug Tallamy's quote about the creating a homegrown national park. I hadn't heard of that concept. I don't think when I started native plant gardening, I don't think he'd even at least written it down. I think that's from the Nature's Best Hope, I think. And that was a little bit later. And that's a wonderful concept. But a national park is, generally speaking, quite a beautiful place we like to go to. So that's the sort of thing I was thinking about. Can we do that? Now, again, I come out of a world of art, architecture, and technology as well. This is the kind of thing that I might have done. This is 2017. No, 2016. I taught in architecture programs at Columbia University. Before that in Los Angeles. I was very interested in technology and the use of space. I got into art as well during this time. I come from a family of artists. No terrible surprise there. This is a project I did at the Contemporary Art Center in Vilnius, Lithuania. It's a sculptural and architectural object, and it's also a machine that increases the sound of rushing air because museums have a lot of rushing air in them. You ever go there and you hear the sound of rushing air. It's everywhere in museums because they have to have outsized HVAC systems to deal with the cooling and the climatization required for the art in it. And so I decided, well, this is 2016. It was that kind of election year. It was also kind of a time when people were talking a lot about social media and its effects on us. And so I was interested in creating a machine um, that would demonstrate to us our obsession with social media by counting the number of, I wrote a computer program to do this, counting the number of devices like iPhones and that sort of thing, things like this in the room that have Wi-Fi enabled. You didn't have to link up to the network or anything, just sniff to see these devices and then make noise proportional to the number of those devices. And if you just turned off your device, it wouldn't do anything. But on opening night, people had their fingers in their ears. They didn't want to turn off their devices. It would really thought it would say something. That's the kind of thing I did. I did a project in New York City at the New Museum. This is called the New City Reader. It's actually on the side of the Storefront for Art and Architecture, right down the street from the New Museum. It was a collaborative project with a bunch of with a whole team where that was one of the co-leaders of it, and we created this idea of like, what if we were invited to a show called The Last Newspaper. They said, why don't you guys write a blog? You're into digital stuff. Like, no, we're going to publish a newspaper. So I published the biggest newspaper there was, literally, in terms of size and thickness. It was bigger than the Sunday Times. And it was about trying to understand how newspapers actually shape our idea of the city. And we'd have a news section every week. So it lasted 13 weeks. We also wanted to go back to the history of newspapers being hung up in spaces, like outside of newspaper offices. That was something that used to happen in men's rooms and urinals back in the day. You'd see newspapers above them, the sports page, the news page. There was something about seeing a newspaper in public we were interested in. We hired a graphic designer. We meant these things to be hung up. And it was a fun project. Exhibited in other places. The one project that's probably the closest to what I'm doing here came out of COVID. It was in 2021. It's also the last project I'll talk about. It's New Jersey based. These are all on my website, varnelis.net. You just, see my name on the front slide, on the website, whatever. You can just Google those and see them on my web. All these things are on my website. This is a project about Glacial Lake Passaic, which is I live in Montclair, and this is just on the other side of the First Watchung Mountain. It was an area where a lake stretched from Pompton Lakes, pretty much up Pompton Lakes, at least not quite that far, from I-80, a little bit north of I-80 actually, to all the way to the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. It was a giant lake that existed when the Great Falls in Patterson were dammed by the Wisconsinian Glacier. And I was very interested in how people inhabit this very dense area that nevertheless has a lot of swamps and it likes to flood periodically. And so I wrote a whole essay about that and took a lot of photographs in that area and presented it, actually showed it in 2021 in the Madraza in Granada, Spain. So we've been to Granada, Spain. They have the Alhambra on the hill, and they have the old Islamic University, right next to the cathedral. And they were showing it in there. And it's actually a site that's actually now run by the Granada University. I'm not exactly sure of the name, but that's where I exhibited. So it's super fun. But how did I get into native plants? Enough of that. I think it's very important for us to tell these stories to each other. So here's mine. I lived in Chicago and I grew up in Chicago, a very urban community. My father was an artist. He and my mother wanted to move out of the city. It was the late 1970s. We moved to Western Massachusetts and purchased a rundown property that had a garden, among other things. It was a big property. My father was an artist. He made big paintings. He didn't have the money to heat it in the winter. It was very cold. So I would have 2 electric heaters, oil-filled radiator heaters in my room when I got back from school. After an hour, it would finally get up to 50 degrees. Oh boy, I still have a cough from that. The garden was designed by Italian designer Ferruccio Vitale, who was an important art designer in the history of landscape architecture. He blended Italianate and classical European design principles with the American landscape. He In New Jersey, he did the quadrangle at Princeton, as well as in this photo that I poached from the internet, the New Jersey Botanical Garden, or before that, Skyland, the estate called Skylands. I don't have any good examples of the landscape at my parents' old house because it had been sorely neglected, and all that was really left was some giant hedges, little hedges that were supposed to be maybe a few feet tall and were like 20 feet tall, and trees, which some of which he brought there. He brought in mature elms. They were all dead when we moved in there, but or dying. But the thought of like a landscape architect designer moving in giant elm is an amazing one. But they did that. My father spent a huge amount of time restoring this property at the cost of his art practice. It sounds a little familiar to me. I'm spending a lot of time on my property as opposed to my art practice and my writing. But most of my father's work consisted of mowing the lawn endlessly. It took him 3 days. Often I would help when I was in high school. I would take a couple of the days, 2 with a tractor, 1 with a push mower, and a weed whacker. Every 2 weeks, all summer long, 3 days. I still have bad memories of that. This didn't encourage me to go into landscape or think about it as anything beyond an idea of formalist shapes and grass carpet to demonstrate mankind's control over the land. But what did excite me was behind my house in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, was a place called the Ice Glen. I was reading a lot of Tolkien and stuff like that, playing Dungeons and Dragons. It was really kind of great to go back there and be in the woods and imagine what, like being, a hobbit or an elf walking through the misty mountains. It was very misty there. Playing Led Zeppelin on a Walkman too wouldn't hurt. This is the Ice Glen. There's a hike you can do through it in Stockbridge. Herman Melville in Moby Dick writes of it in contrasting it to another site. It was a wonderful sight. The wood was green as mosses of the icy glen. The trees stood high and haughty, feeling their living sap. The industrious earth beneath was as a weaver's loom. Nathaniel Hawthorne, I also loved it there and took Herman Melville to see it, if I'm correct. These giant limestone rocks in this glen. You do have to scramble on them. It is not for the physically infirm. You really have to be pretty fit to make it on this thing. They kind of fell into the valley during the Wisconsinian glaciation. It's kind of in between the hill we owned and another hill in the back. And this area was contiguous behind our house was a forest owned by a nonprofit local organization called the Laurel Hill Foundation or Association, and then that abutted the Beartown State Forest. And if you walked in that direction and kept walking, you would never make it out. It's probably 10 miles one direction of just serious woods. Very incredible place. Later on, I found out that whole Ice Glen was surrounded by old growth forest of hemlock and pine. Of course, in the glen itself, and that's my photographs here of the glen, the soil is shallow, so it's dominated by younger trees, which then fall because, again, the soil is shallow on top of these limestone rocks. The hemlocks in the forest are dying today. I've given a serious donation to the town to try and save them by inoculating them with something that's supposed to keep them alive. I hope they survive. A lot of the area on the way has been cut down now. The pines aren't doing that well either. It's part of our crisis that we face, and that's something that disturbs me greatly. But the ferns are in great shape, and I have an obsession with ferns to this day. Now, certainly few of us can create gullies in our yards, but we can draw a lesson from places like this, or at least I did. The native flora of our area is beautiful, and we can, following Elaine Scarry, strive to replicate plant communities like that. Again, not directly, but we can replicate their feel or replicate what makes them special to us. There's no need for exotics or cultivars in an area where things like this can be found. Similarly, I was in Lithuania this summer, and now that I know something about these plants, walking through the woods and talking with a botanist, and we were talking about what's endangered and what's invasive there. There are things from here, like Virginia creeper, that's invasive there. English ivy is endangered there. It's, why do we, I went into, I showed you an image of a cardinal flower at the beginning of this. We saw cardinal flowers, a cut flower at a nice restaurant in Riga, Latvia. Why don't we have cardinal flowers in our restaurants in the summer? I saw a uh, American pokeweed in a uh, being grown in a yard along next to a staghorn sumac, both of which are invasive there. But except for Randy, those you can buy those from Randy, but those are hard plants to find, especially the pokeweed. And why are we so crazy about this stuff? Similarly, you go to Japan and you see wonderful Japanese plants. It's fantastic. We don't need to bring them there. We also don't need to bring our plants there. Canada goldenrod is horribly invasive in Asia, and I think it's supposed to have wiped out 20 plant species in China. It's keep the plants where they are. And we can learn from all of this. Now, again, I didn't really do much gardening beyond that, beyond at this point. I did have an herb garden. I enjoyed that a lot. Mint and lemon balm make good tea and are really easy to grow. At graduate school at Cornell, we fed ourselves from a plot we had in the Ithaca Community Garden. And often I'd rent, but after that, I lived in LA and with my wife in an apartment. We also lived in an apartment in Montclair. We couldn't afford to buy a house until 2011. University professors don't make that, our salaries aren't that good. And so, I didn't really have, I just thought of landscape as this thing that came with architecture. It's the folks down the hall, not even Columbia and the other schools like UPenn, USC, both of which I taught at, they had landscape programs. Columbia didn't even have one of those. So rolling to 2011, we're now in Montclair. I'm teaching at Columbia. We've rented for a number of years. The global financial crisis hits. I'm sorry for everybody who found that a difficult time. It was the only way we could find a way to buy a house, was when the property values finally started going down. My wife saw this house and said we should take a look at it. It turned out to be a very curious house, a mid-century modern house, prefabricated by a company called Deck House. I could talk about that for a while, but I won't. The house had potential, to be sure. It was beautiful and pretty big. It was for the price of this house, we could have a studio in Manhattan. But it was also stained. It needed a lot of restoration. I'll just say it stained an outdated salmon color that matched the outdated salmon color in the foundation. The foundation was easy to paint a different color. The stain, it took about 8 years before we could figure out how to restore the exterior of the house. Before that, before being on NPSNJ's board, I was on the board of a society dedicated to historic preservation of modern architecture. And I asked the guy who literally wrote the textbook on it, he was like, this is a really tough project. We figured it out, and we figured out underneath that stain, the whole exterior of the house is mahogany, which is insane. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars of mahogany. Absolutely crazy to stain it with a solid stain. We figured out how to solve it. The property is not an easy property. It falls 50 feet over 150 feet from the road to the end. Yes, that's 1 foot for every 3 feet in. In the winter, there's a view of the city. By May, I'm more than happy not to see New York City. And there are lots of trees. I like trees. I grew up next to a forest, so I like trees. Here's a little bit later after we bought it. We were lucky to have some nice bushes, some not quite native mountain laurels. They're cultivars. There were some sorry, I said rhododendrons, not mountain laurels. There are some mountain laurels. Here are some, a little hard to see. Those are native. I don't know if they were planted. There seem to be some that grow in the woods nearby. So that was good. There was a Japanese red maple, that dwarf Japanese red maple, which I still haven't got the heart to get rid of, and I do enjoy it. I do understand there's a tree service that might give me $5,000 or $6,000 to transplant it to somebody else's property. That may happen one day. But otherwise, the landscape was thoroughly neglected. There was awful Pachysandra, was awful, and Vinca minor. Here's some of that English ivy that is not endangered here, but in fact is invasive and is growing up the sides of these trees. There's something even worse, this creeping euonymus, this winter creeper that is climbing the tree, and this tulip tree, and had beautiful red berries we like to look at, the birds eating them in the winter, not thinking about the fact that it was invasive and spreading into the woods. That's gone now. Um, we really didn't know very much. This is the same day we moved in, maybe a couple of days. No, this is actually, yeah, after we actually moved in. And I was like, look, deer, isn't that wonderful? Look how, isn't that nice? Deer, garlic mustard, forsythia, pachysandra. Um, at least there was a holly. That was a great thing, holly tree. But, what I didn't know could fill a large book. Um, the day after we moved in, I thought, oh, I'll plant some vegetables in the backyard. They were gone within hours. Nice deer. The I did not try growing vegetables in the backyard again. We had two massive storms, the Halloween snowstorm of 2011 and Sandy in 2012. Huge damage was done to our property. We lost a red oak that during Sandy. There it is. It was probably here for well over 100 years. It was uh, probably, I forget exactly. I have another shot with a measuring tape. It was well over 4 feet at the base, and it just fell during Sandy. At least I got to see it fall. That was something. It knocked out the power line. It knocked down the neighbor's fence. It knocked down a bunch of ashes. I have no idea why this jiggles back and forth. It was happening during the preview. It just does it. I'm sorry about that. The um, It knocked down the utility pole. It knocked down the power lines. It knocked down a bunch of ash trees, which I am convinced had emerald ash borer, because when we pulled the bark off of them, which came off very easily, there were lots of little channels underneath them. They claimed emerald ash borer wasn't in this area for another 3 or 4 years. On the left is the Halloween snowstorm of 2011. Both of them were devastating. A lot of our early landscape experience was simply triage and figuring out what the heck to do, and not in any intelligent way. One day, I went to the public library and I saw two books, and they influenced me greatly. Um, the first one, Ken Drews's New Shade Garden, Creating a Lush Oasis in the Age of Climate Change, was one that immediately spoke to me. I said, a lush oasis in the age of climate change? Why, I remember when I was growing up, yeah, I lived a little bit further north, but it was always really cold by my birthday, which is September 20. There was easily frost before then. I know New Jersey's further south, but that's not really happening very much in the Berkshires these days either. I knew things were changing. Climate change is real, people. We know this. We can't deny it any longer. Even if one is to believe that it's not caused by human emissions, it's real. It's very, very real. And New Jersey actually is one of the places in the world that has been hit the most, has had the most climate change. It's not even everywhere. Mississippi and Alabama, it's actually, strangely enough, not very, the temperature hasn't risen as much year round as it has in New Jersey. The same with Chicago, where I grew up. It was very hot in the summers there. It's not really that much hotter there now, but because it's not an equal thing everywhere, it's really hit New Jersey very hard. So the idea of creating a lush oasis in the age of climate change was really exciting. Ken's New Shade Garden was very influential to me. It isn't all about natives, but Ken is a brilliant gardener and has a lot to teach us. And in fact, we'll likely be talking to NPSNJ sometime very soon. And I'm very delighted about that. And the other book that I picked up that was The American Woodland Garden, Capturing the Spirit of the Deciduous Forest by Rick Dark. And that just made me realize I can do something like what I remembered. I can't have, a massive woodland, but I can have a little piece of something that I would later call maybe a homegrown national park. That was really exciting. Wait, beautiful photographs, incredible advice. And together these books made me think of what could be. And I started thinking about the area around me. I think that's the first thing. It's like, where do you live, right? Where do you live? Where are you? Where are you located if you want to think about design? Architects hate blank pieces of paper. People think, oh, architects want to have unfettered, be unfettered by constraints. Oh no, we love constraints. We love to have demands placed on us. We do not like blank pieces of paper. We like to know. So thinking, oh, well, maybe native plants. Maybe I can actually do something with just natives. That would be exciting, wouldn't it? Has anybody else really done that? This is a possibility. So I began by looking at the site around me. And from the air, it looks like there's a continuous tree canopy. This is right above my house, looking westward into where Glacial Lake Passaic once was, all the way towards the highlands, past the second and third watching mountain. But there are also constant breaks that you'll see on the ground. This is suburbia. This is very much suburbia. I call it the Hollywood Hills of New Jersey because when we lived in LA, we would go to the Hollywood Hills and it would seem like that was the end. But in fact, there was another valley called the San Fernando Valley, the famous valley, the valley was there. And then there were the Angeles National Forest. And it seemed like that is the end of the city. But then there's Palmdale, and which is also part of Los Angeles County, which is like probably the size of half of New Jersey. I know it's bigger than Rhode Island. That might not be true, but it's really big. It takes hours to drive across it, even without traffic. So I kind of thought of it that way, that it's a place that seems like it's at the edge of something greater, but it's not really because there is suburbia starts and stops, or rather gets denser, gets lighter, gets more canopied. This is a view from Mills Reservation, which is a good thing, I guess, to have. It's nice that there's open space. It's about a half mile from me. This is called Quarry Point. There used to be a quarry down here. This is Turtleback. The whole First Watching Mountain came up. It was lava that I'm on the First Watching Mountain. The lava that seeped through the floor of a very shallow seafloor when Africa tried to pull away from basically Staten Island area. Eventually it pulled away again, but this created this lava eventually get uplifted and tilted, and now you can see the turtleback on top of Quarry Point. The tops of these basalt columns. You can also see them as you drive through 280 if you're going through the West Orange area. And of course, Turtleback Zoo is named after Turtleback. So, there's that kind of context of being on a mountain or a hill with this history behind it. And it's very steep because of that uplift, it's very steep on the east-facing side, which is where I am. And this is my property. And in the great wisdom of town planning, Montclair sought to discourage development in this area in the 70s. And so they insisted that houses be set back. This is a moronic idea because that means that my house is in the middle of this property, and that means that I had to have this massive driveway in front of it because as I said, the property goes down 1 foot for every 3 feet you go in the direction towards the back of the lot. So that means that if it's 150 feet down, right here where the chimney would be, it would be more or less 75 feet down. That's a lot. I'm sorry, it would be 25 feet down. I'm sorry, I was wrong about that. 75 feet in, 25 feet down from there. That's a lot. The driveway is steep. People say, how do you keep it shoveled? How do you keep it snow-free in the winter? I say, well, we have an army of elves in the back in the woods, and they come and they do the job for us. It's not a problem. But the real issue is I can't have a continuous forest in this area because this driveway bisects my property. The house bisects my property because that's the rules. Because the house is placed where it can go. There's also, as a result of that, they had to build a stair. I don't really love the stair, but I can't afford to replace it. This stair out of pressure treated wood. So we have one section at the bottom here. We have another section here, and then everything, so that's all cut up in the front. And then the back, well, we wanted to have some grass, have a dinner or something or a lunch, for people when the kids were smaller. They like to play in the back. So we're whittling away at this area, but there's the whole area is terraced. So there's some areas that are very steep, that are steeper. They're like this area here below the stair is extremely steep. Like that's really super steep. So, and it also means that there's no continuous forest. There's a series of forest edges. And now it's kind of the goal is how do you make a forest edge? This is not what my property will look like ever, because this is Acadia National Park. It's a coastal area in Maine. I wanted to use it because it was one of the few images I had of a forest edge. I need to get better images of forest edges for future versions of this talk. Recent research shows that forest edges are, especially in the northeastern US, where whatever they abut, a driveway, a river, a pond, a parking lot, whatever. They show higher levels of forest growth, tree density, biomass, and even carbon sequestration than forest interiors. Researchers who were investigating this found out that the growth response in forests is almost certainly related to greater light availability, which in turn affects tree canopy architecture and can increase forest leaf area and thus stimulate more productivity. This means increased carbon capture. The forest edge is this really important place that is richer in ecologically because it has both the forest and the edge of the forest, and many things like to live at those edges. And that makes it a very interesting spot. It's also known as an ecotone. Ecologists call it an ecotone, which is a cool name. It sounds like a sort of maybe some kind of car from the 60s, or maybe a retro band from the 90s or something. Ecotone. You could just imagine playing some organ or something in the background. But what it really means, an ecotone is a transitional area where two ecosystems meet and integrate. The continental shelf is a great example. When the water you're flying over the continental shelf, you don't see any difference. But if you scuba dived, you would see that that's where all the fish are, right? Because that's where the continental shelf plunges over the edge, and that's where there's a lot of nutrients coming up and mixing, and what different temperatures are mixing. So similarly, forest edges are very rich areas, and so why not work with that then? All right. And now I'm going to get into actually talking about my property and about designing it. It's just a little introduction into what I'm doing, but hopefully it'll be of interest to you, or maybe even of use. The first thing I want to talk about is, again, we college professors in design like to talk about big ideas. So the big idea for this talk is really layers. And the woodland edge is obviously a matter of layers. It's a matter of permeating into a condition, permeating into a woodland condition, going from a meadow or a parking lot, or taking a canoe against a pond and coming up against that edge. And there will be different kinds of plants in those areas. There will be areas that are more shaded. There'll be less shaded. Different kinds of things can grow there. This is a view outside our kitchen window. This is earlier this year. This is June. So we're going to start with this question of layers. And you can see here both horizontal layers, which I'm going to talk about briefly a little bit later, which is the idea of maybe starting with smaller plants and like getting bigger as you go towards deeper into the forest, or in this case, not into the forest. We only have 3 trees here. Some new ones are starting there. But there are also vertical layers, and vertical layers are very important. They're critical to any woodland edge condition, any woodland garden condition, because you need trees. Otherwise, it's not a woodland, right? So the first thing is the canopy, and luckily the house came with that. We have, this is the very top of the canopy. These are 3 tulip trees. This is a beech tree. There are some oaks here. This is the front of the property. You can see it looks very, very different when you get a drone flying above it. This is not an area that most of us will be visiting. It's the realm of the bird, the squirrel, the raccoon, the drone, and the arborist. But this is also the realm of the magnificent tulip tree flower. Interesting things happen here. Raccoons have had fights in my trees from one branch to another. You can see this was taken last year. You can see my beech is already getting impacted by beech leaf disease, which hopefully we will be able to treat. And we're working on it. The tulip trees, oh gosh, are cabled together. Don't do that. And so that they don't fall in the house one day. Or again, it's any woodland edge condition. I think it's key to have a really good arborist, somebody who cares about trees, does not want to cut them down. There's not a lot you can do about the canopy except ensure its reproduction, and you do that through the realm of the understory. The understory is, in many cases, if you're moving into a new situation with that is not somewhere deep in woods protected from deer, is likely bare. Ours certainly was. And here's where you can start to really make a difference. Beyond not cutting down the canopy trees, some people still like to do that for a while. For my arborist, I use save a tree, and one of the The previous arborist once said how a man came and said he had a beautiful oak and he wanted her to cut it down. She said, "Do you see what's on the side of my truck?" And he said, "It says save a tree." She says, "I'm not cutting down your oak. Find somebody else. And you should not be cutting it down." Then she lectured him for a while about why he shouldn't. That's the mark of a good arborist, is somebody who wants to save your trees. That is something you can do, is talk to them and find out ways to what you need to do to save your trees. And there are other services that are excellent out there. If you haven't seen Basil Camus' talk during our fall conference, you can hear an arborist who is unfortunately not New Jersey local, but who is dedicated to saving trees talk about that. Okay, and how to limb up trees, how to properly prune them, and what you should look for in an arborist for prolong the lifespan of your trees, because they don't grow the same, even in a woodland edge condition, as they would in the forest, and they are more prone to damage as a result. Now, there are two kinds of trees you'll find in the understory. There are the aptly named understory trees, like the redbud and the native dogwood, wonderful trees that that you can buy and at nurseries and plant, and they can be an incredible delight. I do love my redbuds. I know there's some people who say don't plant redbuds because there are some that are endangered in New Jersey. At this point, there's so many commercially grown redbuds in the state that I think that ship has sailed. And Cornus Florida is still very essential to plant. Don't worry about the disease. It's when things the nurseries say, "Oh well, Cornus Florida has," I think it's called arachnose fungus. Well, guess what? The Kuza dogwoods they want to sell you harbor that fungus. So much better to plant the Cornus Florida. And I have my Cornus Floridas are fine after 10 years after we moved in. They're doing fine. So I wouldn't worry about that. You do lose a tree or two every now and then to all sorts of things. So go ahead, plant them. They'll last a while at least. The other thing that's crucial and that is a key to maintaining the canopy is seedlings, saplings. Take a look on the right. That's a tulip sapling. There were none when we moved in, and I am guilty of weeding out a quote unquote exterminating a bunch of them. You can also see there's one on the left behind the redbud as well. So there's a tulip sapling here, tulip tree sapling here. Trees like to grow. They like to drop seeds and reproduce, and you can take advantage of this because they will likely land in a spot near you, and you can let them grow. And if you let them grow, you will have, surprise, a new set of trees in the future. Here, before I even weeded out this Pachysandra, here you can see two tulip trees growing. They are now quite big. This is some kind of hickory here. And there's another tulip tree in the background. So this area is actually, if you came to 265 Highland in Montclair, drove by, you would rapidly see that this area is in the spring is getting shaded out. And that's great. This area was not wooded, but increasingly is. That provides us a degree of privacy and for our house and increases shade as a whole. That is important also for the other understory trees. So one thing I should mention is not all trees like shade. So understory trees generally do, but other trees like, for example, oaks. Oh, here's an oak. Don't really love the shade, but they look for opportunities. This red oak found an opportunity at an edge of a wooded area. It also gets to another point I wanted to make, which is we have a massive deer pressure in the state. Until we can get the deer population under control through culls, like Princeton has done, to my understanding, we have 20 times the historical population of the deer. This is terrible for the deer. They live very stressed out lives. It is not like they're just coming back and we're living in their place. There is 20 times the number of deer in Montclair than there was when the Lenape were here. We have eliminated their predators. Their only predators are cars. And that's not pretty and not a happy way to die either. And to top it off, there's a massive deer plague happening in upstate New York. So that's going to hit until the cougars come. And that might take care of the deer a little bit. The mountain lions will eventually come, maybe in our lifetimes. But until then, we have a deer problem. Certainly fencing trees is important if they're young. I've really taken to doing that more lately. But another thing that happens is when they're like little things like oak saplings will often grow in the middle of bushes. Here's one growing in protected by a rhododendron. Here's a sassafras. This red tree here is a sassafras, and it is one of the first trees that turns color in the fall. It's a beautiful tree. And it too is protected by a rhododendron. This is something, again, I've noticed a number of times that trees will grow up in the amidst a bush. It's a kind of a symbiotic thing. Sometimes the bush won't make it. I did lose a mountain laurel that a hickory was growing in the middle of. It happens. And sometimes they do very well. I don't really have a photo, but there was a rhododendron that a tulip tree grew out of the middle, right in between the leaves. And now the rhododendron is doing very, very well. And the tulip tree is already like 30 feet tall. So some things work in interesting ways. This is some of the non-native rhododendrons. I'm really sorry about the jumpiness. If I knew why it was doing it, it wouldn't be happening. Over here, behind it is a redbud, a dogwood, and behind the sassafras tree is also an elderflower, which is kind of in between a tree and a shrub, which gets us to our next point, shrubs. So a little bit below the understory trees in our layers, vertical layers, are shrubs. Rhododendrons and azaleas are great shrubs. Mountain laurel is another fantastic one. In the past, I would buy shrubs like the ones on the left. Here you can see them, and you notice how my house is, the exterior is half restored and half of it has not been. That's what we uncovered underneath it. And going back to the whole staining situation, but you can see that I was spending a lot of money, about $250 on each of these rhododendrons, of which about half of them at least are dead. Today, this is 4 years later, bald and burlapped bush shrubs have a really tough time. If you took off the burlap off these, you would find that the roots have been cut, often with saws. The root systems are severely compromised. The trees have a huge shock to their system. You could go to a nursery and get rhododendrons like the ones on the right for a lot less money, about $40 each, 25 if there's a big sale. These are all rhododendron maximum, native rhododendron. And they will grow, they have a higher survival rate. And if they don't make it, and not everyone will, but at least 75% in my experience make it, within a few years, they will look no smaller than the ones on the left, which will slowly wither. So highly recommend when you do buy shrubs, buy small. The same with trees, if possible, always buy small. There are many, many bushes you can plant in the woodland edge, from spice bush to sweet pepper bush. I'm not going to go over all of these. Sweet bay magnolia, here's an image from Wikipedia, growing in front of Popeyes. It likes a bit of sun. It's a native magnolia that is not evergreen. Viburnum nudum is a fantastic bush. You can go wild with bushes and find some really great ones out there. Bottlebrush buckeye is one of my favorites. I initially thought it wasn't native to New Jersey, but Bonap says it is, so I'm very happy to hear that. If you need a bush that will take over a large area of property, and when you have a half acre, you look for those, and that has visual interest with nice looking leaves and amazing bottlebrush-like flowers in the spring, bottlebrush buckeye is a great one. Its only liability is it's not evergreen, so it's not ideal for privacy, but it's a pretty darn great plant. Again, I'm not going to go over the different bushes and different plants you can buy. That's not what this talk is about. This talk is more about just the different ideas about growing in the woods and how you might think about it. And a bit about how you want to incorporate all of these ideas into your design. And it doesn't have to be done all at once. You can do these things little by little. Certainly I have. Further down, all the way down, is the layer of non-woody herbaceous perennials and annuals, which is also critical. This is your ground cover, but you can do a very different sort of ground cover than the traditional monoculture of Pachysandra and Vinca minor, and have something much more interesting, simply by intermixing different sorts of plants. In this case, always, first of all, the first rule is always plant densely, way more densely than any guidelines will tell you. In this case, you can see this is about May in front of my house next to those tulips. You see foam flower, which is the flowers, or tiarella, the flower, the white flowers coming up. You see Mary bells in the background by the trees. Those are yellow flowers. They will unfurl over the course of the plants will unfurl over the course of the next couple of months and will provide a different layer. So when you're thinking about layers of ground cover, think about the layers of ground cover as vertical layers in microcosm, the layers of the woods in microcosm. I'll show you some more slides of this, but different levels, different heights from strawberry, which is very low to the ground, wild strawberry, Fragaria virginica, or virginiana, I forget which it is, to the Mary bells. It's a great place for places like this are great places for spring ephemerals, which dart up. Take a look at this trillium. I don't know if you can see on your home screen, but it's got some nice pollinators on it, some flies right on the red. I really like that image because of that. Here it is towering over these very same foam flowers, very same spot, right? It comes up and it shows its leaves. Then it lasts, the trillium lasts a little while, then it goes away. It's a great place to also think about layering in time. I'll talk about that in a little bit at the end, but as well as in space, vertically and horizontally. Again, think of your plants as a mulch. Think of them as a green mulch that can cover the ground and eliminate all the weeds. So you don't have to weed anymore. It's a lot of work to plant plants, but it's a lot more satisfying than weeding them. You will find that your plants might be too competitive to each other, and that's an opportunity to edit and move plants to other places you need to grow them in. Ferns are excellent for occupying vertical space. Below them, other plants can grow. Vines and stoloniferous plants like Virginia creeper. There you can see our lovely Virginia creeper here, which I did not plant. Except by digging out areas on my property. It was all local. One of the few natives that really is local on my property, which was really just, I would say, destroyed probably by agriculture and then by construction over the years. Very little was there. But these plants can find plants like these vines and stoloniferous plants can find the spaces between plants. They can fill empty spaces. They can dart around and do things. They can grow on walls. They can be vertical in some cases. Here you see Virginia creeper on a wall that I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Here's another view of that same spot where a little bit further in by those tulip trees. It's kind of one of the spots I've worked on the most, so therefore I have the most images of it over the years. Again, you can see the different layers, the different heights from the strawberries down low. You can see some woodland phlox starting to come up. The trilliums are going to disappear over time during the course of the year. But other plants will remain, even if at a lower density. The one thing I want to point out also in this image is if you look in the sort of middle here, middle left of the slide, you can see there is a plant with this kind of cool looking like thing on it, like chevron here, and there's more in here. I was sold that as Lance Corporal Virginia jumpseed, which was supposed to be a native, but it wasn't. And that's a cautionary tale in why I really choose to buy either at native plant nurseries, native only nurseries, or if I'm going to buy something else at another nursery, I will make sure it is something common and I will do my research first because it turns out that that is not a native plant. It is an aggressive invasive from elsewhere, and I am still weeding it out. And very soon my property looked like this. And that was a disaster. This Persicaria virginiana is not from Virginia. It is in fact from Asia, and it grows very, very aggressively. And while they're aggressive natives, I will talk about soon, that is not a plant you would want. Again, there's just many, many opportunities for you to go wild and really explore different kinds of ground covers. Mayapples can be a great ground cover, although they do disappear in August. Again, you can think of spring ephemerals that can grow in these plants. For example, Virginia bluebells are great. They shoot up, they have their flowers, they love being there for you in April and May, and then they disappear and you don't see them again. This plant in back is a lovely plant that is not quite native to New Jersey. It's native to the Ohio River Valley and parts of the Appalachians. This is called celandine poppy, not to be confused with greater or lesser celandine. It's Stylophorum diphyllum, and it's too good a plant for me to leave by the wayside. You can make a choice for yourself whether you're okay bringing something in from a neighboring state, better than a distant exotic or even a distant native that might, I would say, that might cause more problems with the local ecotypes. Here's another view. Wrap this section up and go on to the next one. I know don't want to spend too long talking. This is a this is more mayaples, foam flowers, ferns underneath, peeking through the leaf mulch on my property. And again, what you can do is you can think about even like look at these ferns that are not quite, they will eventually tower over the mayaples. At this point, they're quite small. There's another great ground cover. I don't have many good images of it to the right. This is Allegheny spurge or Pachysandra procumbens, which is the native Pachysandra to this area. It's native to New Jersey. Some people have trouble growing it. I do not. It may be more that nurseries have trouble growing it. It is a fantastic plant and grows well with these. Again, this is a place to be exuberant and inventive and pick up books and visit places. We'll go over some places to visit right at the end. Solomon seal, ferns, columbine, foam flower, all sorts of great things you can play with. Again, you know, Larry Weiner, who's one of my great design inspirations, landscape art designer, talks about this in terms of improvisation and jazz. He says that he's also a free jazz musician. He says it's that gardening with native plants is a generative process. You set something in motion. You plant a plant, you seed something. Will it survive? Will it spread? Where will that columbine go? I guarantee you that columbine has moved on to some other interesting location now. You can't expect to control it directly, but you can edit it. You can guide it. You can move things. I do that all the time, and that's a much nicer thing to do than weeding. Okay, I want to go down one last layer, and that's a crucial thing for any discussion of woodland, of the woodland garden, which is to go underground. You don't just leave the leaves for the pollinators. You leave them because the leaves are literally the top layer of woodland soil. The O horizon here is, there's actually even, this diagram doesn't even go far enough. Larry Weiner had a great diagram in which he showed that leaves and twigs are the top layer of woodland soil. There's the stuff that just fell, the stuff that's just falling every day on my property right now. This then decays into organic matter, and below that you get more minerally soils, all right? Around here, in this heavily suburbanized area, this is just down the street, you can have this very hard red soil. I looked at it when I moved here and I said, I've never seen anything like this before. I can't put a shovel in it. And my property did have this right in the front of the property. But if you do treat it properly, it can look like this. This is literally like, you know, just one house away from this barren area. And I don't know if there's any Roundup being sprayed here, but I don't think you would need to because it's just simply impossible to grow anything in soil that has been compacted by heavy machinery, where the topsoil has been removed during construction and probably sold to somebody, and where the leaves have been removed for 40 years. The result is going to be basically a soil that you can't get a shovel into. Or more appropriately, since I really, even though I do use a shovel, I really like these hori-hori knives, these wonderful Japanese knives. And in my property, I can just stick that right into the soil. This took about 4 or 5 years to develop. And the main way I developed it was planting plants, putting in arborist wood chips, here are some, and letting the leaves stay behind every year. This area has actually been destroyed by the town, which has twice in the last year dug up the whole area to first put in Belgian block that I didn't want, and then second to put in a line for a street light that I really don't want, and it's really bright. But I'm earlier this year, here I am. I got a delivery of arborist wood chips from my local arborist. It's important to know who you get a delivery from. And I dug those into the soil. And already a little while later, not only is the matter decaying, but what I get, and this is what I love to see, is mycorrhizal fungi, the white strands of fungi that are essential because they not only help break down this matter, they also into very rich organic matter. They also are important for many woodland plants. Woodland plants really thrive on mycorrhizal fungi. They often are very symbiotic with them. So it's essential that you plant. You leave the leaves, you leave the twigs. This is the top layer of my soil. If I see a twig, I break it up and I throw it back in the bed along with the leaves. Um, and that they break down over the course of a year. They provide mulch, keep water in and from evaporating, and they also really help change the soil into a living ecosystem that can support plant life. All right. Finishing up this little section, I want to just mention a couple of things that didn't really fit anywhere else, but kind of fit with the idea of thinking about your soil and how you can do things. I can't plant everywhere, but I can use aggressive natives like white snakeroot to colonize land. This is a very steep slope. One day, I hope to have it eventually all planted. Everything that is native here, I planted, except the white snakeroot, which I planted one of, I think, and it is spread all over, and that's okay. Christmas fern, rhododendron, viburnum nudum, those are great. Another viburnum nudum here, but I don't have the money or energy to plant the entire hillside here, which also is steeper than, I think it's over 45 degrees, very sloped, but I need to do something to prevent the leaves from falling down the hill. They will roll down the hill because or drift down the hill because it's extremely steep. I also need to prevent the soil from eroding, and white snakeroot is fabulous for it. So if you can learn your seedlings, learn what to keep. Again, this is just the hard work of memorizing the way plants look. And once you have that, you're set. You will find that things will colonize themselves. Pachyra aurea is another fantastic ground cover that spreads very well. I bought some of that, and I'm using that throughout. It's maybe a little bit prettier than white snakeroot. And the other thing I want to point out about arborist wood chips is that it is excellent for encouraging new plants to come there. Larry Weiner speaks about how he had an area where he planted some large trees. It was some client's property, and he planted some large trees about 20 years ago. And he also had an area of his property where he just dumped arborist wood chips and just forgot about the area. And he went back to the client's place 20 years later, and he said, my gosh, the trees in my property that just seeded themselves, much as those saplings I showed you earlier, those trees are bigger than the trees that Larry had planted that were 20-foot tall trees. So arborist wood chips have this kind of amazing effect where they do encourage the fact the change in the soil that they will create. I don't think you need to apply them every year. But if you're getting started in a woodland garden area or woodland area where people have been taking the leaves away, they're a really good jumpstart to the soil. If your soil looks like that soil I showed you earlier, it'll make a huge difference to your property. So, again, encouraging things to grow. This could be a final shot. I know I'm going to be getting to one last section here, but I do want to show you the difference. I didn't know where else to put this. So I put this here because we were talking about soil. This is a day when it's 92 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is my property. It's 86.9. It's 2 p.m. Literally 1 minute later, I went about 100 feet away to a property where the leaves are removed every year. There is oh my gosh, what just happened? No seedlings are allowed to sprout. There's no tree cover. It's 115 degrees. And the asphalt actually was 122. So thinking about shade areas, you can actually make a difference in your heating bill with this stuff, or your cooling bill with trees. All right. I want to talk about the horizontal briefly, much more briefly. We're going to be talking about, go through a couple of things briefly, about 10 minutes, and we'll be done. I know I'm a little bit, well, I know my talk was going to go an hour, so getting towards the end here. Um, I want to talk about horizontal layers very briefly. We've gone through vertical layers, but what about horizontal? Horizontal is important, that is depth. Depth is important because it allows you to deal with vision and distance in the garden. I don't have great examples of this now in my garden. I'm working on it. But strategize a way to deal with vision into the woodland or deeper into the woods. This is Bowman Hill. Here you can see a naturalistic landscape. I don't know how wild this is or if it's just been planted to look wild. William Robinson wrote a book called A Wild Garden about 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, in which he introduced this idea of naturalistic gardens, gardens that look wild, even though they aren't. There are many examples of this we can go to. In the front, so one example of one thing you can do is in the front, you have lower plants like ferns close to the trail, close to the road, close to your house. In the back are taller bushes and trees. So this is again a strategy you can create. It'll take a little while, but it's a useful one in terms of being able to deal with the blocking views, but also offering something more at a closer in at a lower scale. This is Jessie Connor's wonderful woodland garden. She's one of the co-leaders of the Southeast chapter. Here she took some goldenrod and she just simply did the Chelsea chop, which is an incredibly useful tool to prevent your plants from getting too tall. You cut them in May, about halfway up. And she Chelsea chopped the front of these goldenrods so that the back ones are full height. But the front ones, this is the same plant, but because she chop them at a certain point, she's created a kind of layer as you go in, a vertical and horizontal layer. Here on my property, you can see that lower plants in the front, the flowers of the Pachyra aurea in the back, rhododendron. You can think of things as surprise is wonderful. Here's a surprise. I planted a Christmas fern in between those 3 tulip trees and some soil that had accumulated there. It's very happy there. Why not? Why not add a Christmas fern in between trees? Think about what you might see in the woods, and think about what you could do with it. One more thing I want to talk about is hardscape. Hardscape is something that you may not have to deal with, and lucky you if you don't. Since I have a big hill, I needed to build a retaining wall. The engineer said, we can build a wonderful engineered stone wall. I said, I don't want that, sir. I want to build a stone wall like you see in upstate New York and New England, because I grew up there and I'm used to those and I like those. And I can also plant plants in between them and they will take over and they will grow. This is 2 years after the stone wall was built. It looks like it was there since the 19th century. Even with the most modern house, a stone wall is really a fabulous way to go. Dry stack stone wall, no concrete in between. I guarantee you these stones will never move anywhere. You can see here a rock polypody fern growing happily in between the rocks. Yes, I planted it. I didn't plant the strawberries. They were up top and they're kind of drifting down in here. There's some creeping phlox that's also up above. I did plant that and it's starting to creep in there. Columbine loves being in here. Even poison ivy, which in the fall has wonderful fall color, loves the wall. Some more images of the wall. The old plants, Sedum tornatum, woodland stonecrop on the left, those flowers on the right. Things to just love. You can stick these things in the little patches of soil and they'll be very happy there. Again, more hardscape. I had to replace some engineered stone stairs, and I did it again with something that would have places for cracks and crevices and for things like my strawberries to grow. And they grow very well in between them. This is on the right, an engineered landscape that had to go because I needed more room for heat pumps. And that gave me the wonderful opportunity to, again, invite the mason over and do a dry stack stone wall. This is a year later. I did plant some larger rhododendrons here. Hopefully they'll survive. This area is filled with gravel because that's what the heat pump people wanted. So alum root's great in gravel and it loves it there. Heuchera. You can, again, if you are going to need to do hardscaping, think of naturalistic hardscaping, not something that has to have what do you call it, black landscape fabric underneath, and you need to use Roundup on every year to prevent things from growing on it. Go the opposite way. Let your plants grow in your landscape, in your hardscape. Luckily, when during the construction of the house, they hauled out a bunch of giant boulders, and we have a rock garden. Nothing better than finding some spots in the rock garden for some ferns. So that's almost it. I'm going to finish up with one last little section, which is time. Think about the seasons. I've already mentioned this repeatedly. Here's Virginia bluebells in front of my house. They disappear, and then that area, they disappear completely by June, and then that area is filled with ferns. Again, gardens are not static. They have seasons, and think about all of your seasons and what you want to grow where. And maybe there are areas of your garden that will be more attractive in the spring and others that'll be more attractive in the fall. Maybe you have a meadow area and that isn't the greatest in the spring, but then show people the spring ephemeral area with ferns. These are all ostrich ferns I've planted and they reproduce very well, and you could have your own world of them. This is Bowman's Hill. One of the most beautiful areas I've ever seen at Bowman's Hill is this river delta area or whatever it is. But it's right below the nursery, and it's full of mayaples, celandine poppies, and Virginia bluebells, and it's stunning in the spring. It's one of the most. It's truly like a homegrown national park. Here, this shows that a monoculture, not really a monoculture, but three plants can work, and mayaples are amazing for this. Sometimes it's good to have, in terms of design, just have one area that you dedicate to one thing that is amazing, and mayaples are excellent for that. Seasonal texture changes. By the summer, leaves get fully developed. Different things start to bloom. The mountain laurels blooming in the background. The mayaples and the heuchera are huge here in this area. Other things like the twin leaves start being worse for wear in June, but the summer is still quite a great time. The fall, again, so this is the area in front of my house. The fall, it's looking a little ragged, simply because a lot of these plants have died, or not died, but have gone dormant for the season. And what you can do, again, as Jesse did, as Jesse did here, for example, actually in this image, you might take a page from her and you might add some goldenrod and some small sprays of asters in the matrix that you've created for your other plants. And then you'll have some fall color. And of course, there are leaves. If you're planting trees and understory trees, all sorts of trees, you can have fantastic fall color. Sumacs are great for that. Here's all sorts of trees. I mean, who doesn't love fall color? So if you think of that, that's something people go to the Berkshires for, is to see the color, but you might have it on your property. And the leaves are a hugely profitable thing for you. I hate gas-powered leaf blowers with a passion. I do have a driveway in a house, so I do need to do something with the leaves on the driveway and the roof. And so what I do is I have this brand new Ryobi battery-powered leaf blower. It's actually quite quiet. It's nothing like the gas-powered leaf blowers, and I just blow the leaves into the beds, or I gather them and I just haul them in a tarp to the back where I can put them in other areas that need the leaves, because the driveway doesn't really need them as much as land does. And finally, in the winter. Again, and this is no room in this talk to talk about this, but there's winter textures are something to think about. Think of evergreens like that holly in the back, the rhododendrons, the mountain laurels. Think about leaving, as you leave some of your herbaceous perennials that, like in this case, maybe some goldenrods or some asters, that they provide texture. And you can read the books of Pete Odolph, for example, to find out about the theories behind that. And finally, speaking of that, there are great resources for actually high-end garden design you can look at. And the very best ones are actually in person. This is the Lurie Garden in Chicago. It's by Pete Odolph, the world's greatest gardener. It's dominant natives, although not all, but you can still learn a lot from that. You can learn a huge amount from looking at gardens that are at Famous Gardens. This is Garden in the Woods at Framingham, Massachusetts. I don't have good photos of it, except for this one. That one I poached from a website. This is actually from Garden in the Woods. I just got so absorbed with the little things I saw there. It's the Native Plant Trust's garden. It is actually, to me, the most beautiful woodland garden I've ever seen. It is fantastic. It's been maintained since 1931. You see unbelievable things like this, and you ask yourself, how much of this is natural and how much was planted? And can you get away with doing something like that? Closer to home, the New York Botanical Garden is a great resource. Um, Not everything needs to be native. One of my great inspirations was Federal Twist and Garden Conservancy. I think I want to have all natives. I hope you have all natives. Um, but Federal Twist is not mainly natives, but it gave me the idea of having a garden that is so exuberant and so profoundly impressive as Federal Twist, which is located right by the Delaware River in Western Jersey. It's considered one of the greatest gardens in the U.S. today. Private gardens, and visit it, and you can learn things, about, especially about meadow gardening. And I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the author. It's kind of, just, of course I was trying to remember it, didn't write it down. But he's written a book called The View from Federal Twist. Amazing book. And you can learn a lot from looking at how other people have dealt with gardens. But I do think natives are more interesting for me, and also better for the environment. Finally, Bowman Hill, one of the most beautiful spots in this area. There's so much to go to see there. There's a nursery. It's all fantastic. And you can see things you might never expect, like a stand of prickly pear cactuses flowering in the middle of June. And of course, things you would expect, like ferns and leaves in the fall. Um, One last resource, I mentioned Larry Wiener's name a number of times. I think his book, Garden Revolution, is an excellent, excellent book. So is New Directions in American Landscape, which is a fabulous resource. And I highly recommend it as a place to take courses. I've taken a class with Larry at the Berkshire Botanical Garden. In January, there's going to be a big symposium. Every January there is, and I think it's in Philadelphia. Larry is local. He's from Pennsylvania. And has done work in New Jersey, and hopefully will speak to NPSNJ in the future. He has spoken to us again. And you can learn a tremendous amount from his book, Garden Revolution, which is co-written with Thomas Christopher, who also hosts a podcast called Growing Greener out of the Berkshire Botanical Garden. There's a lot you can learn from that as well. Very short, fun podcasts. And the final plug is for the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. I got started at the state level by actually an advocacy, which is a huge thing we do. We advocate for better legislation. We're trying to make it we really get excited when we can get bipartisan support for things, for initiatives. We're working on trying to get in the worst invasive species banned. We have there are other things going on now that are exciting. That's where I got started. I later on helped rebuild the website, and the website is full of information for you that is specifically on New Jersey. We have our chapters with a wealth of information, and we have also the fall conference, which we just had on trees. Surprise. And in the spring, we're going to have one that is going to be very exciting. It's in person at Ocean County College. Go in person, come and join us, and see what we have to offer, because we do have an awful lot to offer. The very last thing I'm going to say is, and I mentioned before, the native plant nurseries, of which Randy is one of the owners of Toche. Not only they're great places to buy plants, but they know so much. I've learned so much from Mara Ginos. I've learned so much from Jean, who is a volunteer at Bowman's. And I've learned so much from Randy. I've learned so much from Jared and Rachel. And there's so much, these people have so much to offer, and they were just eager to they don't get rich doing this, but they're eager to share their information with you. So I highly recommend you go there and you talk to them about what you might be up to. And someone might say, well, why don't you try this plant? This is a really cool looking one. You're like, oh, I've never heard of that one before. And then you find out it is a very It is exactly what you needed. So that's it for my talk, and I'm going to stop sharing. And
Thank you so much, Kazys. That was fabulous. It was like a long tour through your garden that I visited briefly this summer. But I got to see it through the seasons this time, which was
a
very
little bit shorter
exciting.
than that hour and a half.
It was a little bit short. We are actually running over time, but
I'm
I was
sure we
going to
are.
give us about 5 minutes for
Okay,
questions. We do have a couple
some
questions
quick
that have come in.
questions. Sure.
One quick question, I don't know if there's a way for you uh, to address this easily. I'm trying to remember who asked the question. It was Amy, actually, who asked if there's some way to get a list for you to post a list of the plants that you talked about because you were going
Oh,
through so many plants so quickly.
oh, I'm sure. Yeah,
Um,
I can actually do that, and we can paste that into the comments for the YouTube when this
all
is
right.
uploaded on YouTube. I can't do it right now because it'll take about a half hour, but I'll be
It,
glad to. Again, that what my intent wasn't to give you a list of plants. There are things for that. There is Rick
no,
Dark's
but people
wonderful
were
book, The
taking notes.
American.
People were taking notes and they couldn't write all the
But
names
yes,
down.
I'm sure. But go to the native plant nurseries. Go look at Rick Dark's book. That's a really good resource. Look at the William Colina books. Those are excellent resources. They're harder to find. You may need to look at your public library or do an interlibrary loan. Some of them are getting expensive, but and go to these places I mentioned. You go to Mount Cuba, which I didn't even show a side of. They have little and Bowman's. They have little signs that say what all the plants are. And that, by the way, one other thing I just want to say is in trying to appeal to your neighbors, it also is great to do things like make like a really nice sign that costs like maybe $50 or something. You can get them on the internet that might tell you this is a native, what kind of garden it is, might have a link to potentially a website like mine. I do that in front of my house. And then also you can buy these little zinc plant labels at stakes at on Amazon. You can take a laser printer. You can just print out labels, and then you can for very inexpensive for a very small expense you can have labels everywhere in your garden. I think I learned that from Bowman's. I think they do that here.
Let
So
us get to
those
the
are
rest of
ways
these
to teach
questions or
people
we're going to
about
run
it.
out of time, Kazis. You
Oh,
want
go
to get
on.
to, all right.
You can come to my
So,
property and see the plants
so
with the
someone
label.
wanted to know, it was a two-part question. How did you remove the Japanese pachysandra? I've heard quite a few people have been vexed at that. And how do you protect your plants from deer?
I pulled the Japanese pachysandra. Okay, so there are a couple of things. Weed whacker, which I don't love using because I'm afraid of the microplastics it's producing. But I'm using supposedly biodegradable stuff in it, but who knows? But weed whacker will help. Pulling it after the rain. That's what I do. I had my daughter help. I paid her a little bit this spring to pull out a lot of it, and the vinca, which was actually worse. I've gotten almost all of it out. It was a lot of work. And then also leaving the leaves. It helps smother these plants. So there's that. As for deer, I use the main arsenal I have is called Deer Out. I basically have to spray every week with it. I also have cameras and I have like remote controlled sprinklers that I bought on Amazon that when I see a deer on my Blink cameras, I press the button and the sprinkler goes off, and boy, do you see them run. And also I will go out and I do have to monitor them. The deer are a menace. But that is another thing you can do with a deer. Deer Out is organic, or I don't know if it's organic, but it's eggs, peppermint oil. It's a bunch of rotten, nasty things that deer don't like, but it's not a chemical.
Another question, this one from Claire. You've talked a lot about the joy of arborist wood chips if you don't have enough natural material,
Yeah.
leaves and whatnot on your own property. If you're trying to get good arborist wood chips from a reputable source, what
Yeah.
questions do you ask the arborist? Like, how do you know that
Oh,
these are good wood
that's a very good
chips?
one. Yeah. Well, first of all, you probably should get to know your arborist first because unless you have no trees, you will want to have an arborist and you want to have a relationship with them before the hurricane hits. When they go to all the people they do have a relationship with, they usually don't even charge to go look at your trees, and so that's a great thing. Um, Save a Tree and Do Jets are good ones up here. I know there are others all around the state that are good. You might want to ask your Native Plant Society chapter if they know of any good arborists. You can watch Basil Camus to hear how he would identify a good arborist. That's the first thing is find a good arborist. Second, you could ask, you could say, I don't want vines, I don't want brush, I want the big stuff, the good stuff. They have to pay to get rid of this stuff, or they just they don't even want it. They're glad to give you the arborist wood chips. So they want you coming back to get more, so and telling your friends. So they will give you good arborist wood chips unless they're really an awful arborist. But again, good to make a relationship with an arborist early and find one who likes trees and understands trees. If you point to a tree and you say, "What's that?" and they say, "I don't know, but I think you should cut it down," you probably want to keep looking. Also make sure that they also ask to say, like, please don't include any ash or beech or other trees that might have diseases in them. Again, they have a surfeit of these, a massive amount of them. So I wouldn't worry. My guy said, "Oh, gee, that I had a load, but it had a lot of vines in it. I don't want to give you that stuff." Yeah, that's
Well, there were a couple other questions that came up about, specific garden situations, privacy edges, this, that, and the other thing. This is the last question, Kazys. If you
sure.
had to recommend one
I'm here
book
all night.
to make great recommendations for, because you mentioned a lot of books, which one would you
I
pick
mentioned three books.
to send people
Uh,
to
okay,
for great recommendations?
it's really tough. I mean, for woodland gardens specifically, I would say Rick Dark's American Woodland Garden is the best book on that and the most inspirational. But Garden Revolution gives you a framework for thinking about things holistically. It'll work anywhere in a meadow. Larry is a huge built constructor of meadows. He does incredible work. You can go to the Berkshire Botanical Garden and see one of his young meadows there. And he will tell you how to deal with things like soil and seeds and in great depth. So I would say you kind of need both, but
All
but
right. Well,
there you go.
I figured if I
Those are the
tried to
two I would
limit you to
really
one,
try.
I'd get at least two,
Yeah, that's going to happen with me.
Kazis, thank you so much. This
Thank you,
was
Randy. Thank you,
fabulous.
everyone.
It was lovely. And thank everyone for coming and sticking with us. We will let everyone get on with their evening. And even though Kazis already did uh, a push for everyone to become a member of NPSNJ as Vice
Please
President of
do.
Membership, I would be remiss if I didn't tell everyone at the end to please consider becoming a member of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey to help us support great programs like our Wednesday webinar program, our mini grant programs, and all the great chapters that we support throughout the state. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And
Okay.
Kazis, thanks again.
Hey, thank you all.
Good night,
Looking forward
everyone.
to seeing you in the future.